echo actually quite a lot of what's been said already, this has been billed as a comedy bit, but I've definitely already laughed out loud already this afternoon, so no pressure on me if this really isn't funny at all. So I am, as Emma said, I'm the new head of talent and skills for Tech North. It's not to be confused with Tech That. That's, of course, the not-so-boy band anymore that has now outlived 5 British prime ministers. A joke for all, no? As Emma said, my name is Kirsty Styles. Yes, that is Styles as in Harry. And by that I mean that we share the same surname. That's me and young Harry from One Direction. We're not related or married, as far as I know. Certainly not related and married. When I met up with Herb Kim, who's one of the creators of Thinking Digital and on the board for Tech North, so technically my new boss, I told him about the fact that I'd done some comedy, some stand-up before, and he seemed rather impressed. I didn't tell him I'd open with 2 mediocre jokes about boy bands, but after seeing a video of my set, he did suggest I maybe update it for today's event. Likely he was hoping that I'd remove the opening reference to sexually transmitted diseases, which I promise had a tech slant to it, and that I'd probably get rid of the minor criticism of government ministers, which I have done. So over the past 5 years, as Emma mentioned, I've had the real luxury of working as a journalist in London, although that's not exactly an intro that makes me popular with people up here or anywhere. In fact, but the days of me hopefully chucking 300 words into the internet every hour and pointing the finger without offering any real solutions are behind me, at least for now. I'm now what you call an expert. Not well liked either in modern Britain. So as I've said, I've been a technology journalist for the past 5 years, and that was entirely by accident. I wanted to be a political journalist, a commentator, an expert, but I couldn't get a job post-financial crisis, mid-media, get its act together crisis, eternal living in the north crisis, so I had to leave. I ended up at a huge app development company in London back in 2011, and I was like, fuck me, in my thick Warrington accent. This stuff is fucking powerful. And that's the thing that has kept me in the industry, the power that we now all have in the palm of our hands. I'm sorry to report that I've experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. I just never anticipated, as a young woman and as a graduate, and I had to leave. I have had an alcoholic boss, and again, I left. And I've often felt like I'm just throwing well-crafted prose into a black hole that we call the internet. But I've also watched and reviewed 5 years of what we now call Tech City. That's Silicon Roundabout, Old Street to people who live in Hackney. I've had opportunities to go to Moscow, to Berlin, to Dublin, to see how the world's best cities are doing tech too. And frankly, I've had a ball. I've seen a lot of hotel rooms, and I love sleeping in a bed that somebody else has made. You really wouldn't believe it now, but back in 2011, we actually had to convince people that mobile was going to be a thing. People had kept prematurely calling out the year of mobile. This is the year that it's going to happen, while they were half laughing about things like phone snubbing. That's fubbing, ignoring people using your phone, and nomophobia, that fear of being without it. The fear is real, I'm sure. But now our phones are pretty alarmingly ubiquitous, and half of you have probably already checked your phones. I see a woman in the middle doing it right now. Have already looked at your phones, and I'm only 2 minutes in. She's looking around like, what's me? We used to watch really closely how much time was spent using apps versus the mobile web, the penetration of smartphones versus what I guess we can call dumb phones. But over 5 years, those numbers have become so large, it's almost not worth counting anymore. Obviously, you guys are into tech. I don't really need to tell you that. But along with the great ascent of smartphones, one of the great constants over the past 5 years has been the hand-wringing around digital skills. At the one end, we appear to have a lack of enough homegrown talent. That's not attractive people. That's people who know how to do jobs, to fill those new and as yet uninvented roles. And that's including thousands and thousands of jobs here in the north, in Newcastle, across the whole of the north, which we need people like your good selves to do. And at the other end, there are more than 12 million people in the UK who lack basic digital skills to properly interact with modern society. And that's not to mention the looming spectre of mass automation. It matters when people can't get access to or afford broadband and the right hardware, because that's where shops, that's where the government, and that's where personal interactions are increasingly headed. Again, I don't need to tell you that. And it matters too if young people, like me in the past, can't get a good job. And yet there are great roles going unfilled. That wasn't supposed to be funny. I was unemployed, it was upsetting. When you go to the job centre and they're like, wow, you should be a journalist. Yeah. Yes, you got any of those going? So a couple of weekends ago, I was speaking at quite a high-profile event, humble brag, about infrastructure. And me being me, and now working at Tech North, I put forward the wacky case that perhaps we should work on perfecting our digital infrastructure, and indeed social infrastructure, preschools, schools, universities, so that people are ready for the jobs of today, not even just the jobs of tomorrow. It feels like digital barely gets a look in when we talk about big infrastructure projects. And, that's because you can't really see it. You can't wave your willy. You can't say, look how big my fiber cables are, because they're under the ground most of the time. But connectivity is a top 5 concern for digital businesses. Incidentally, the number 1 challenge is finding the right people to do digital jobs. And physical infrastructure, trains, power stations, etc., further down the list. You could argue that rather than pushing on with something like HS2, which will actually make some of the journey times longer when travelling from London up to the rest of the UK, or indeed travelling back down, we should simply electrify existing lines at a fraction of the cost. I'm sure you all argue with your friends about this all the time. Or in fact, we should just make sure that we have more carriages travelling east to west each day, so you can work with people, at University of Liverpool, you can work with a startup in Sheffield, and actually, crucially, just make sure that they have Wi-Fi on board, because I don't mind if it takes me 3 hours to travel from Manchester to Newcastle. Great journey, lots of nice scenery, but it would be great if I could work along the way. But being a young person, being a woman, and talking about something like that, the other panelists at the event that I mentioned clearly weren't greatly comfortable about this whole idea, and my arguments were pretty roundly ignored. Our digital skills crisis, for me at least, is also profoundly intertwined, as has already been alluded to, with that well-documented north-south divide, the unemployment problems during past periods of deindustrialization and globalization, and of course, with diversity issues in the tech industry. And that's another thing that I feel like I've banged on about way too much in my 5 years as a tech journalist. We know that women make up half of the population, more in this room than average. We know that women make most of the purchases within a family because men are frankly children, I'm assuming. So it's a commercial imperative, not a nice to have good representation of women in your business. But of course, diversity goes beyond gender. Have you ever wondered why Google Maps doesn't have an option for wheelchair users? Because it doesn't. Today, the guys in Silicon Valley and Tech City, and it is painfully often just guys, white, 28-year-old, affluent guys, to be more exact. They're sitting around solving problems, and I'm sure climate change and world hunger are on the list, but day to day, these people don't really have many problems. Another dating app it is then? I recently chatted with someone about a mail-order tampon startup, just a little reminder that women bleed at this point. And the founder was pitching her idea to a bunch of all-male venture capitalists, explaining why it's obviously such a huge market. And one of the guys interrupts her and says, "Is there any chance you could use a different word instead of period?" Well, I could use the word menstruation. It has the word men in it. To suggest this is a pipeline problem is not good enough. To suggest this is a problem that women alone can solve is likewise not good enough. To suggest that just because tech is a relatively new industry, that it operates outside of our society, our culture, our advertising industry, our media industry, that says women that do this and men do this, is at best unhelpful. Many people working in tech are transplanted straight from the corporate world, bringing with them the heady hangover of a boozy business culture that isn't family or even human friendly. I was standing in a pub near Old Street, Silicon Roundabouts, as I've said, waiting to get served a few months ago, because I was in London, you've got to wait for these things, waiting to get served, get charged like £7 for a beer. And so as the blindly friendly northerner that I am, I start chatting to the fella next to me. And I asked him what he does, and of course he worked for Google on their search engine optimization, which is enhancing our collective digital amnesia, to you and me. And so, of course, the cheeky northerner within me, the first words out of my mouth are, have you ever thought about using your powers for good rather than evil? Sorry if anyone from Google's in the audience. And he said, I actually used to work for the Israeli military, making the sight finders on their weapons more accurate. Anyway, he said eventually, can I have your phone number? What part of I think you're evil do you not understand, sir? It's been estimated that we'll need as many as 2 million skilled people to work in new digital savvy jobs by 2020. Of course, coding is now compulsory at schools, but many teachers aren't that digitally savvy, and few people who are getting big bucks in tech would take the pay cuts to teach in our schools today. MPs reckon that already we're losing £63 billion a year because of this gap. And we may also lose many skilled people, and maybe the university is having its own thoughts about this post-Brexit. Many Europeans I know, at least working in the tech industry in London, somehow don't feel that welcome anymore. And so we could have even more jobs to fill in the not-too-distant future. But as much as it's a challenge, and it's certainly a challenge for me in my new job at Tech North, it really is a fantastic opportunity to get everyone online, skill up unemployed young people, lots and lots of women who are underrepresented in tech, and those living in areas of the country, like the North perhaps, where other industries have shut down. I recently chaired an event in London, and there was a Northern MP who said, there just aren't enough good jobs in the North. And I nearly ripped his bloody microphone out of his hand, but that would have been terrifically unprofessional. Finally, what I'd like to talk about is about the ethics that underpin our digital economy. Because technology alone will not save us. It's what we do with it, sorry, time is up, that counts. And that's either a whole load of cat memes or using it to transform our world. When we know that minerals for smartphones come from conflict zones in Africa and the assembly process exploits Chinese workers, that feels to me like our problem. When Amazon investors themselves are saying that the economy just won't work because they can't spend the money that they've amassed fast enough, and while some people have too little to operate in the economy, that feels like a real problem that the brightest and best people in the world, people like you, have the power to do something about. How much technology usage is too much? These are all, personally, for me, things that we just don't talk about enough yet. I was on a district line train in East London recently, and I saw a young black man sitting in army gear, knitting. And an older woman sat nearby said, I hope you don't mind me saying, sir, I just really didn't expect you to kind of be sitting here doing that. And he said, the only thing that men can't do is have babies, and there isn't anything that women can't do. Finally, I'd like to leave you with the fine words of probably the world's most successful boy band. That's Take That. These are words that I left Warrington with 5 years ago and that stayed with me throughout my glamorous life as a journalist. I hope this works. Never forget where you've come from. Never pretend that it's all real. Someday, soon, this will all be someone else's dream. This will be someone else's dream. Thank you.